Hey, welcome back. We're going to finish up the Enlightenment here. We're going to take a look at some of the Enlightenment thinkers that will go along with with your assignments for this unit here. And so when we're looking at in America, the Enlightenment thinker that's going to affect us the most is going to be John Locke, because Locke is going to influence Jefferson and the writers of the Declaration of Independence. He's also going to have a huge influence on Madison and the Constitution. And so, so Hobbes and Locke are two English thinkers that develop different ideas about society. And so the interesting thing about them is both of them exist during the time period of the English Revolution, or the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution. So they both witnessed it, but they're going to come away with totally different ideas, right? And so Hobbes is you kind of think of Hobbes as like this grumpy old man, like doesn't like new stuff. And I always kind of think of John Locke as like this long-haired hippie, kind of likes everybody and believes in everybody. And that's an overgeneralization, 100% an overgeneralization. But that's kind of how I roll it around in my mind. And Hobbes is kind of interesting because he believes that man is naturally greedy and cruel, and he believes in a strict government, that a strict government has to control men. Otherwise, they're just going to rob and fight and oppress one another. So if you think of it like, here's my cell phone. If Hobbes was correct, then I could only hold on to this cell phone if we didn't have government, if I was big enough and strong enough to hold it. And I'm sure that there's people out there in the world that are big enough and strong enough to come and take away my cell phone. And so how we prevent that is by we give up parts of ourselves. We enter into this social contract. We give up some of our rights to take other people's cell phones to the government in order to maintain our own stuff. Okay, and so life without government would basically just be chaos. And down there at the bottom, we can see Calvin and Hobbes, which kind of dates me. These were a cartoon. It was a comic strip when I was a kid. And a guy and his pet tiger, and they have dart guns and they just shoot each other. And so it'd be total chaos. So Hobbes believes that people enter into the social contract in order to have peace and harmony in society. And this social contract is an agreement by which people give up their state of nature. They give up their ability to take people's other stuff or be controlled by the biggest, strongest person. They give up that in order to have some kind of understanding in society. All right, we exchange natural rights of the individual for the good of the whole. So I give up my ability to take people's stuff to prevent chaos. And here we go. Here's a little cartoon. One English guy saying, "All right, you don't kill me, and I won't kill you." And they're like, "Hey, sounds great, awesome. All right." And so Hobbes believes that only a strong government could provide such social order, and he believed the best way to do this is to have an absolute monarch, because they could impose order and compel obedience and make people do exactly what they wanted to say, right? And the reason, here's our little quote: the best reason why monarchy is a strong government is that it's intelligible. It's an intelligible government. The mass of mankind understands it, and they hardly anywhere else in the world understand any other. Well, it's real simple. There's one guy, and he's in charge, and he tells you what to do, right? And so Hobbes is interesting because Hobbes was actually a tutor for Charles I, who gets his head chopped off during the English Civil War. So he sees this, and then he sees the chaos that comes about following the English Civil War, in which the Commonwealth is established, and the Commonwealth takes away people's individual rights, the rights to cuss and dance and go to the taverns and go to theaters and be Catholic and choose not to learn how to read, right? All of those things were imposed by the Commonwealth that follows the English Civil War, which we talked about in the last unit. And so Hobbes looks at this and he sees all this chaos that comes about, and then people don't know what they want, because as soon as Cromwell dies, the Commonwealth falls apart. And what do? We just go back to another monarch. We go back to Charles II, who restores all those rights: your right to say bad words and go to the theater and go get a beer at the tavern. And so Hobbes looks at this and he's like, people don't know what they want. They need a strong king to show them what they want. And so he writes numerous articles, and some of his ideas get absorbed into America and to other places as well. So it's not like Hobbes is not important into the Enlightenment just because he is a supporter of absolute monarchy. Yeah, he has some good points. Sometimes people don't know what they want, and ultimately democracy is really messy. And the counterpart to that is going to be John Locke. And so Hobbes is going to be in his, I think he's in his early to late 50s. He's in his late 40s, early 50s during the period of the English Civil War. John Locke is going to be in his late teens, early 20s. And so he's going to see this from a totally different point of view. And he's going to believe that people are basically reasonable and moral, and we have natural rights. And these are rights that Jefferson's going to call inalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence, which are life, liberty, and property. Now, obviously, we take property and we change it out in the Declaration of Independence and we call it the pursuit of happiness. And then by the time we get back to the Constitution, we remove pursuit of happiness and we put back property, because one of the functions of the American government is to protect private property. And so life, liberty, and property become very, very important to John Locke. And Locke is going to actually witness the beheading of Charles I. It's right across the street from his school or his college, his university. So he gets out and he's going to go watch the king get his head chopped off, right? And Locke believes that, hey, you know what, government should be limited, that there should be limits to what the government can do and can't do, right? Like the government shouldn't be able to kick in your door and take your stuff. The government shouldn't be able to throw you in jail for no reason. And those limits should be written out and logical. And then those limits, the functions of the government, should be accepted by the people. And so Locke is basically arguing that the power of government comes from the people, right? Constitution, we the people. Form this government to protect our natural rights or to protect our rights. And Locke believes that, you know, this idea of an absolute monarch is wrong, and that the common people should have, or that people should have a say in their government, because, you know, hey, they're the ones that are most affected by it, and they're going to have the better ideas of what happens. And so Locke has objections to like a lifelong government, like a monarchy, right? Because he believes that government has basically an obligation to the people, that you have to protect the life, liberty, and property, protect people's natural rights. And then if the government fails to meet those obligations, then the people have a right to revolution. They have a right to revolt. Right. And he's going to go a little bit further and say that people have an obligation to change their government when the government no longer protects their natural rights. And so if you look at the American Constitution, one of the things that we have set up in there is a way to change the government, or to change as a way to revolt. Every 2 years we have elections on the federal level, right? We in November. This is October of 2022 when we're filming this. So in November, in a month, we're going to have midterm elections where we're going to re-elect every member of the House of Representatives and a third of the members of the Senate. And then in 2 more years, we're going to re-elect a president or pick a new president. We're going to re-vote on every member of the House, and we're going to move another third, re-elect or pick a new people for another third in the Senate. And then in 2 more years, we're going to get rid of or have an election for everybody in the House. And then the final third of the Senate is going to be reelected. So in 6 years, we could totally replace the American government peacefully and bring about, you know, theoretically bring about a new government, or we could change the Constitution or whatever to better meet our needs. And this is the idea of Locke. And so both Locke and Hobbes witnessed the English Civil War and the Commonwealth and the Glorious Revolution. They see the Glorious Revolution come about, where we go back to, you know, when James II takes the throne, and the people don't like him, and they bring in William and Mary, James's daughter, and then they force him to sign the English Bill of Rights, which guarantees rights to the common people of England. And so Locke is going to see this as a support of his ideas that people are logical and they can bring about change. And Hobbes is going to see the exact same things as support of his ideas, that people don't know what they want. Like, come on, figure it out, guys. How come we have to go through a monarch, a commonwealth, a monarch, and then change monarchs and then create this limited monarch, right? And so it's totally different along those lines. And if you need a review of what they saw, go back and watch the video about constitutionalism in England. Okay. Other Enlightenment thinkers that are important. The first one is going to be Montesquieu. He's going to be French. And he's going to study governments. He's going to sit around and study political science. And so Montesquieu is going to study the governments of England and Italy. And he's a critic of absolute monarchy. He doesn't believe that we should have an absolute monarchy. He believes Locke is kind of right. But how are we going to protect these rights? And so he believes that the best governments have some kind of insulation within themselves, checks and balances, to prevent one group of people from becoming too powerful. And so Montesquieu looks at England, and he actually makes the mistake of thinking that they have three branches of government when they actually only have one, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Montesquieu comes up with this framework for a government in which you have three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, and each one has checks and balances over the other. They have abilities to block the power of the other, just like in America. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress, and they make the laws. Well, and then you have the executive branch, which is the president, and if he doesn't like the laws, he can veto a law. But if Congress likes the law so much, 2/3 majority, they can override a veto. And then ultimately, the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, is going to overrule or could rule on those laws if they get brought before them to decide if they're constitutional or not, right? So you have judicial review. In addition, the Congress can impeach a president and remove a president. The president appoints members of the Supreme Court. The Congress approves or disapproves, confirms members of the Supreme Court, or doesn't confirm them. And so there's a little bit of checks and balances there, right? Montesquieu, again, checks and balances. There's no greater tyranny in which that is perpetuated under the law. There is no greater tyranny than that which is perpetrated under the shield of law and is in the name of justice. All right, whatever. And so that's a fun little quote. I wish I could go back and, anyways, checks and balances protect liberty. Then we go to another French thinker, Rousseau. And Rousseau is kind of interesting because he believes that man was born in a natural state. And so man by himself is good, but as he enters into society, he gets corrupted by society. And Rousseau has this idea of a noble savage, that if you just like cavemen are good in their own way, but as they come into society, they're presented with ideas of greed and lust and whatever. And so Rousseau writes this book called The Social Contract, takes the idea from Thomas Hobbes and puts it in his own book. Now, he doesn't write the same things. It's just kind of arguing, again, this idea of a social contract. And he basically argues that society puts too many limitations on behavior, and that society takes away some of the good things that make us good. And that, that ultimately governments could control people, but they should be elected freely by the people. And that ultimately the good of the community should be placed over the good of the individual. So individuals are basically subordinate to the community. So like, we have the right to, go shoot guns, as long as, you're not in a crowded place. So like if you want to go out in the field somewhere, as long as you're, are in a safe place and go fire off guns, you should be able to do that, but you shouldn't be able to do that where you could possibly hit somebody, right? He opposes political repression and supports the idea of a direct democracy where every single person has the same amount of power, and we take part in direct elections to settle issues. Great idea. Problem is, as societies grow, it would be too cumbersome to do that. And so in America, we create this idea of a representative democracy where we go, right? Voltaire is also French. We're not going to spend a ton of time with the French thinkers as far as like Locke and Hobbes, because Locke and Hobbes write in English, so it's a little bit easier for us to do this, versus the French, you have the translation and whatever. So Voltaire is probably one of the more famous philosophers that come out of the Enlightenment. He's going to speak out against corruption and religion, but he's an adamant supporter of free speech, right? Like he believes that people could express ideas however they see fit. And he says, hey, I disapprove of what you say, but I'm going to defend to the death your right to say it. And so Voltaire's ideas are going to be brought into the Constitution, and the fact that one of the first freedoms that we do have is freedom of speech. And Voltaire doesn't believe in democracy, but Voltaire believes the best government is some kind of an enlightened monarch, somebody that at least believes in this idea of enlightenment. The problem that you could poke at that right off the bat is like, look at Hobbes and Locke. They believe in two different, totally different things, and they're both quote unquote enlightened. So like Voltaire is saying, hey, I like monarchs that think the same way that I do. And that's problem. Ultimately, he gets kicked out of France because of his beliefs on his speaking out about government corruption. He finds refuge with Frederick the Great of Prussia. He develops a close relationship with Catherine the Great of Russia, who is this idea of an enlightened monarch. But they have a falling out because of Catherine the Great's support of serfdom. Right? Voltaire insisted that she should end serfdom in Russia, and she was refusing to do that. And so Voltaire basically stands up for his beliefs and loses some high-powered friends. A couple other members of the Enlightenment that are worth noting is Diderot. Diderot is the first person, doesn't necessarily add anything by his way of thinking, but he's the first person to kind of create an encyclopedia. And so he creates a 28-volume book in which he puts all the scientific learning of the time into text that people can go and look up and read and learn about things, right? Speaks out against slavery. Again, he believes in this idea of expression and freedom of speech and freedom of thought, and he's going to compile a learning throughout. And then we have some representation for the women out there. Mary Wollstonecraft is considered the member of the Enlightenment movement, and she publishes a book called The Vindication of Rights of Women, where basically she calls for equal education for women. She ultimately argues that women's place is secondary in society, that they should stay home and raise families and do those types of things. But the men and women are born equal in natural rights, and they should have a right to education, especially if they're going to educate their youth, right? Interesting side note, Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter is Mary Shelley, who's Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and she writes the book Frankenstein, right? Again, remember that Frankenstein is the scientist, Dr. Frankenstein, and that Frankenstein, the monster, is Frankenstein's monster. All right. And so here's a quote from there. I've never seen a man eat so many chicken wings. All right. I like that quote because I like chicken wings. All right. So there we go. There's the people of the stop this. Okay. So anyways, there we go. That was that's the people of the Enlightenment. Hopefully that this breaking up lectures allows you to watch them in smaller segments. And I will be back when we talk about the cultural changes of the Enlightenment and the birth of capitalism. So, all right. See you guys in a little bit. Bye-bye.